Okay, good morning, everyone, and as always, lovely to see so many people here live. It's a lovely thing that slowly getting back to live learning in so many areas. So I just really wanted to continue our discussion from the last Shiur, and also subtly backtrack on something I said with the hope that no one notices. So just very subtly backtrack, nothing too disastrous. Because a number of the comments you made as we were learning made me rethink a little bit what I wanted to say. I'll start with emphasizing, actually, just triggered by the comments that Jeffrey and Karen were saying. The important thing to start, or to sort of notice at the start of the Mishnah, is that this is a sugya about a particular type of shivrei kelim. We're not talking about trestle tables which are designed to be assembled and disassembled and reassembled and so on and so forth. We're talking about a shever, a break that occurs. This is a type of shivrei kelim, and yet for some reason or other, the halacha is that this particular shever, this particular break, the deles is not muktza, and that's the conundrum over here. That's the problem over here. And Tosfos really asks this. That's Tosfos's. That's the second Tosfos. Tosfos' second comment on the sugya is why is this different to the halachas of shivrei kelim? So let's again restart with Tosfos, and then move on from that. So first of all, why is the deles not muktza? So Rashi says because it's a kli agav avian. It is or maintains its status as a kli through its parent keli. And somehow or other, in this case, it doesn't lose that status. That's what Rashi seems to be saying. So normally, when something breaks, it ceases to have its preparedness as it previously was, because it no longer is that keli. It's no longer that utensil. So I had a nice crystal vase. That's fantastic. It's not muktza. It's a crystal cup. It's a cup. It's a keli. Now that it's smashed into smithereens, each shard of glass ceases to have that preparedness because it has become completely dysfunctional. It's got no function whatsoever, and therefore it is muktza. In this case, deles, the door of the keli is otherwise. It doesn't lose its former status, ostensibly seemingly in Rashi, because it could be reattached, and therefore it hasn't lost its previous status. So that's the first point. That's why it's not muktza. Tosfos then contrasts this with shivrei kelim, not in the case of the smashed smithereens of crystal, where they're completely useless, but in the case of shivrei kelim, where there is a usefulness. And Tosfos says, why are the halachas different in those two cases? Why is it that shivrei kelim, in a case where the shever has a usefulness to it, the Gemara seems to think it's more obvious that it isn't muktza when the break occurred before Shabbos, and in our case, the Gemara seems to understand it's more reasonable that it's not muktza when the case occurs on Shabbos. And on that, Tosfos explains it's because the continued function of this broken piece is different in the two scenarios. In the scenario of the delet, the continued function is its original function. It still has its original function. And therefore, if the break occurred on Shabbos, it was already fixed at the beginning of Shabbos as part of a usable function. It's the delet, the door of a keli, the lid or the door of a keli, and therefore it maintains that usefulness even though it broke on Shabbos, because it can get back to that usefulness. That's that's in that case. In the case of the other type of shivrei kelim, where I don't know, has a clay plate that's smashed, but the clay pieces still have a usefulness, they no longer have the original usefulness, they are getting a new usefulness, they're being imbued with a new quality. Now that's easier to understand when that occurs before Shabbos, because if it broke before Shabbos, it already had the new function before Shabbos, and therefore it came into Shabbos as a non-muktza entity, not because it's a plate, because sadly it's no longer a plate, but because it's a piece of shards which has a different sort of use to it. But if the break occurs on Shabbos, there I could have heard that it would be muktza. Why would it be muktza when the break occurs on Shabbos? Because on Shabbos it can't get a new usefulness. Its old preparedness has disappeared, has evaporated, because it's no longer a plate. I want to give it a new status of a keli that we could think wouldn't happen on Shabbos, and therefore it's more of a chiddush when that status occurs on Shabbos. That's Tosfos' chiluk. And the feature that I want to draw out going forward from this is that Tosfos' answer, and presumably Rashi's answer, as to why the delet is not muktza, would be because, as Rashi says, agav aviyam, because it maintains its original usefulness, because it can be reattached. That seems to be the simplest reading in Tosfos' view. Yes. I don't think this Nukuda is a machlokas between any of the Rishonim. In other words, I think all the Rishonim are understanding that the case we're talking about is a deres that is removed on Shabbos, is separated, is taken apart on Shabbos. Either because it broke or because I chose to separate it. That's not the pertinent halachic feature over here. But the point is, it isn't something which is just designed for detaching and reattaching, detaching and reattaching. Otherwise, it would be a different halacha. That would be the halacha of as I said, things which are just designed to be put up. Right? So conceptually, the point is it's in a broken state. I don't mean that it's snapped and you need to bring in a metal worker to remake the hinges. On the contrary, it's clear that that's not the case. I could, we will see many Rishonim think I can reattach on Shabbos, or at least it wouldn't be a derais. It's not my Zobin. I'm not saying it's broken as in that there's a snap that's occurred, but I'm saying it's not in designed in its functionality to be put together, taken apart, put together, taken apart. It's a non-functional state at this point. It is broken in that sense of the word.
So it's a door which you cannot necessarily put it back.
No.
On Shabbat, I mean, in its current state.
Yes, in practical halacha, it may well be that I'm unable to put it back on Shabbos. And that's what in those Rishonim, it's explicit that this is a broken state. But it seems to me a premise of all the Rishonim that it's if you push me, if you sort of hold me by the throat and force me to prove my points, I need to think about whether I can prove it or not. So your ha'ara is a reasonable ha'ara. Maybe I should have methodologically worked through all the Rishonim to check that my assumption is right. But all the Rishonim that I could see seem to have held that. It may well be that halachically I can't put it back on Shabbos. Yes, that's correct. Correct. Yes, yeah. It's not a shivrei kedi in the sense that it's broken and shards. That's Tosfos' distinction. But it's in a state of dysfunction. This isn't its normal functionality. It's not just a lid that I take on and off or something like that. That's not the chiddush of. It's in a dysfunctional state. That's why I meant by saying it's a sheva. Yeah.
No translation historically like that. Just the word from historically would not be listening.
Correct. No, so I don't know it from the words. I came to that conclusion from seeing the Rishonim, because the whole reason why we'd consider a Muktza possibility here is because as it currently is, it hasn't or has lost some of its functionality. So it's in a dysfunctional state, as opposed to it being something that is designed and prepared to be attached, detached, reattached on the Shabbos, in which case that's its functionality. That's how it's used. A flat pack chair that I straighten out is not the topic of our sugya. No one would have a moment's thought that that's Muktza, right? You know, a foldable chair is technically broken in the sense that it's dysfunctional. It can't be used as a chair. That's not our sugya. We're talking about where it's broken, where it's out of its normal functionality. That's why the sugya of Muktza starts. Muktza starts because something isn't muchen, it's not prepared. Right, so a swing open and closed chair is prepared. That's how you use it. That's not called dysfunctions. It's clear, at least if you ask me to prove my point, I need to work through all the Rishonim. Maybe I can't. But at least in Tosfos and in the Rishonim that we're going to see, that seems to be their premise. They're all comparing it to shivrei kedim. They're all dealing with a dysfunction over here. And I think it's true in Pshat in the Mishnah, not because of the translation of the word Nisparku, because that's why discussion around Muktza starts.
So can I ask in Tosfos?
And I'll come back to you in a minute.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. Anyway.
So for example, the Tosfos 3.
Yes.
Says the reason why it's not Muktza is because you can put it back on Shabbos.
Yes.
And if you would have a nicer woman to put it back, then it would be
Yes. Okay, so the Tosfos is one of the sources where my light and hopefully unnoticed backpedaling from what I said last year will occur. But more seriously, you're correct. I mean, that's why the Tosfos really discusses whether it is Muktza or not. I'm simply arguing that even in the Tosfos Rid, he's talking about putting it back together. If it was just the natural way of using its functionality, there wouldn't be a sugya about it. It's broken, but I can fix it. Either in practice I can fix it, or I can't fix it on Shabbos, and we'll discuss that shortly. But there's a fixing that's occurring, some degree of fixing. The reason why it's not identical to other Shivrei Kelim is because, according to those read, because it is fixable. But it's a fixing. You're not fixing a chair. There's no halachic discussion when we talk about a flat pack chair, which is opened and closed, even though technically it's really the same. You would think it's the same thing. If I look at this chair, why is this chair not Muktza? It's unfunctional. A folder chair. The answer is its functionality is to open and close it and sit on it. There isn't a comfort with the fixing over here, an ease and obviousness of it not being Muktza. The Mishnah is belaboring the point and just debating and discussion on Shabbos, before Shabbos. None of that makes sense with a flat pack chair, a folder chair, not flat pack chair. Because of this point, because since if it detaches, it is Muktza. It's difficult to understand why, but therefore the Havamina was that it would be Muktza on Shabbos. You would need to take it off on Shabbos. That's the diuk in the Mishnah, at least enough to explain why the Mishnah bothers mentioning, uses a slight turn of phrase to indicate that even where it's not Nisparku, it's not Muktza. Because there's a Havamina that the lid should be Muktza.
I feel like you're having it both ways, because you're saying that the lid has to be broken, and then that's why there's a whole shaila in the Mishnah. And that it wasn't broken, it's obviously there was never a shaila. And then the Rikva, then you're saying that the Rikva, somehow it goes the other way. The Rikva is saying that
the Ritva is a difficult Ritva from a nuance of a diuk that we questioned, but
Mishnah said two things. So it said Daltoteihem and
yes. So the Ritva is going on the first Chiddush. Why would you think that the Deles is Muktza? And his answer is because since it has a tendency to break, you might have thought, or to separate, you might have thought that it should be Muktza. If its design is to assemble and disassemble in a completely mutter way on Shabbos, and that's its very functionality is like that, like a folding table or chair or trestle table or the like, it doesn't seem to me that there's any Mishnah to talk about. That's its design feature. That's how the KD works. I mean, that's what it is. So I'm not coming from the meaning, the translation of the Sparku. I'm coming from what's explicit in any of the Rishonim that make the Shever comparison, and what seems to be Sparku. Wrongly or rightly. Again, I'm not claiming it's broken in the sense that it needs major expertise to fix it. On the contrary, many of the Rishonim say the point is it doesn't need any expertise to fix it. All I mean by the word broken is it's out of line with its functionality, as opposed to a foldable chair where its functionality is to fold and unfold it. That's all I mean when I say use the word shaver or broken. And therefore, Tosfos is right. It doesn't mean my agreement, but Tosfos is right to make the comparison to Shivrei Kelim. We're dealing with a scenario of a special and limited type of Shivrei Kelim, which uniquely, as opposed to broken shards of clay of plates, doesn't have Muktza clicking in. Okay, so that's an introduction, and again, thank you to Jeffrey and Karen for bringing out to me that maybe this is something that needed to be spelled out more fully, and I sort of neglected to discuss. Now, the second point which emerges from this first discussion is what seems to me to be a machlokas rishonim as to indeed why isn't the Deles Muktza? And it seems to me there's two. I thought on Sunday that there were three families of rishonim over here. I now think there are two families of rishonim: model 1A, 1B, and model 2. So what I thought was three parts, I now think is two parts with subtle differences between them. So just to avoid confusing everyone, to explain what I mean. Broadly speaking, there seems to be two. The language of the Rishonim differs considerably. There seems to be two ways of thinking about the situation. One explanation as to why it's not Muktza is because its original use lingers in the sense that I can very easily put the door back on. So again, the core question we're facing is that the delet is dismantled. It's broken in the sense that it's lost its functionality somewhat. So why isn't it Muktza? What's the answer to the question the Mishnah raises, which is, I would think it's Muktza, and the Mishnah says it's not Muktza. So answer number one to that question is because it's reattachable. It can get back to the way it was relatively easily and perhaps in a permissible manner. And answer number two to the question is because it still has some functionality now, because it can now still be used as a lid or a cover of the entranceway. That seems to me to be the two families of thoughts in the Rishonim, either because it can be restored back to being an attached door, or because even in its detached state, it still has some functionality, it still has some usefulness, and therefore it still is a keli of sorts. It can still be used as a cover. Does this come as a shocking surprise to anyone, or did everyone pick up these two? That seems to be the Rishonim. Where I somewhat messed up in the last year is I jumped to conclusions about a nuance of the difference between the Rishonim, and I actually want us to read through all the Rishonim together, because I think this is quite an important opportunity for us to actually learn the Rishonim together and hopefully come to a conclusion about exactly how to split the Rishonim. Yeah, sorry, Max.
Sorry, I'm not sure if it's a different functionality. Is that where it splits up into different ideas?
No, so
you can use it to trade.
There are nuances within all the Rishonim, but for now I'm just looking at them in very broad, coarse two camps. Within these camps, there are nuances, which is, as I said, I sort of got a bit confused about in the last year. But they're broadly speaking two camps in the Rishonim. Camp number one is what stops it being Muktza is because I could restore it back to being its original functionality as an attached door. Camp number two is because even now it has a usefulness to it. Now, within that, I think we'll see the nuances, but those are, to me, that seems the biggest split between the Rishonim. Model number one is it's not Muktza because it's easily, practically speaking, and even maybe halachically allowed or not allowed, we'll see, but it's easily restorable, and therefore it's still the door of the keli because it's easily restorable. Model number two is even now it has a function. It's still the lid or the door of a keli, even though it's detached. Even in the detached form, it has a use. Not as good and convenient a use as it originally had. It still has some usefulness. That seems the two models. And the Mishnah Berurah, interestingly, adopts one of these models. That's why I added the Mishnah Berurah into the sources. Mishnah Berurah seems to take sides in this Machlokes Rishonim without actually spelling out. He doesn't say this is a Machlokes Rishonim. And there's very obvious practical nafkaminas between these two stances. I mean, just think about the maths of it for a moment. Model number one says the reason it's not Muktza is because it's reattachable. That's the chiddush of the Mishnah, that even though currently it has no function, and therefore by any measure, that means it's no longer a keli, it should be Muktza. Nonetheless, it still is a keli because it's easily reattachable. Implication, if it wasn't easily reattachable, it would be Muktza. That's model number one. Model number two is, forget the reattachability of it or not, the point is that it still has a function now. I can still use it as a door, or if you've got a cupboard and the door's fallen off, I can still sort of prop the door up. I can still use this as a door of sorts. Therefore, it's not Muktza. The point isn't that I can reattach it so much as it currently has a use. Again, I want to emphasize within these Rishonim, there's nuances, and it's not quite as black and white as I thought it originally was. But broadly speaking, what I'm saying is correct now. Just a little more hesitantly than I said on Sunday, which is that the second model is it currently has a use because I could still use it as a lid of sorts. It's not a great lid or a great door, but it's still usable. In that model, the only reason it's not Muktza is because it's currently still usable. But if it was currently completely useless, it would be Muktza. So there's a very real practical halachic distinction over here. In this case where a door falls off a cupboard on Shabbos, if it's easily reattachable, is that the reason because it's reattachable that makes it not still a door, or is it because it currently has a use? And the nafkamina is obvious over here. If it's not reattachable or it currently has no use, what would be the din? The Mishnah Berurah just seems to casually take sides in this machlokes. I'm not quite sure why, but that's why I added the Mishnah Berurah as a source if we want to get to the realm of practical halacha.
In the Mishnah, it seems clear that the Halacha means that you associate cupboard doors with house doors, and that really the key difference is that cupboard doors are not going to be metallic, and house doors.
Yes. Okay. So let me.
That's a logic. Sorry, that seems to argue much more for the it's still usable now.
No, so thank you for that point. I'll answer it briefly, but we're going to look at house doors at greater length later. But your point is helpful. Just bring out one Nakuta. In both models, there's a chiddush, which is it doesn't have the full functionality that it had when Shabbat started, either because the fact is it's at the moment useless, even though it can be reattached, or because the fact is at the moment it has a sort of clumsy just about use, but so does almost anything. I mean, you could prop up the cupboard with a random board that you found, or with a stone that you found, and so on, and they all would be Muktza because they're not made for that use. The reason this isn't Muktza is because since it retains a lingering usefulness from its original use, it doesn't become Muktza. So both of these models are premised on the fact that since it started off as part of the Keli, therefore, even though now it's pretty dysfunctional, since it has some lingering link to that original use, it doesn't become Muktza. As opposed to the house door, which for whatever reason wasn't part of the Keli because houses aren't Kalim, and therefore the lingering use wouldn't be enough to stop it being Muktza. That's the thing. So in both cases, its current situation, if I would just look in isolation at its current situation, I wouldn't realize it wasn't Muktza because it is detached. I could reattach it, but at the moment it's detached. It's pretty useless. It's just as rubbish. I mean, it's just propping something up against the door of the cupboard. But because it wasn't Muktza when Shabbos came in, or even before Shabbos, it was part of a Keli. Therefore, the lingering usefulness is enough to make it still a Keli. And that's why this Mishnah is an exciting Mishnah, in the sense that the Mishnah is getting us to think about usefulness. It's getting us to think about Kalim. It's getting us to think about preparedness, and that's what Hilchos Muktza is all about. And the Chiddush the Mishnah teaches us is that something that was part of the Keli and retains some lingering association with that usefulness isn't Muktza on Shabbos. How does it retain a lingering association with the Keli? Either because it's reattachable or because it still has some covering and dooring functionness to it. That's the Mishnah. Yes.
And the door to our house could also be the doorway.
True.
Yeah, more to get in. So, and I'm not sure the relevance is in that scenario of the buying to not being
because the whole reason why the door of the cupboards isn't Muktza is because it was part of the Keli and therefore has Keli type functionality to it. Since a house isn't a Keli, and we will look at this in more detail in a future share, since a house isn't a Keli, we can't think in terms of lingering functionality because a house doesn't have that sort of functionality. It's its own entity. It's a house. It's not a Keli. And I'm putting that on hold. I'm just asking us to accept it in a sense that because it's a house, it's wrong to think of it as a utensil that I use for my usefulness. And therefore, the house door, correct? Yes, the house door can't avoid Muktza by arguing that it's a Kli because it still has lingering functionality. It could be reattached because it was never part of a Keli. It was part of a house, and houses are not Kelim. That's the maths of where the argument will go. Even though I appreciate we haven't fleshed out what all of that means.
I'm struggling to understand the lingering functionality.
Yes.
With regards to the
with regards to
1A,
yeah,
where it's not Muktza because it now has an alternative use.
Yes.
So, lingering functionality when it's going to go back and be a door again, like get that one.
Yeah.
But when it's got an alternative, I'm still struggling to understand how it saves it from being over.
Okay, so we'll have to see if there is a view around alternative use. But if an alternative use is enough, and by the way, in the case of classic Shivri Kalim, it seems clear that alternative use is enough. The way to respond to that would be because all usefulness is part of one family of usefulness, and therefore that it's not an entirely new thing. It's true that the particular functionality it has is new, but it's not new in the sense of it being a useful thing, a utensil for human needs. So again, the question is how narrowly do we delineate functionality, or do we view all functionality as part of a family of functionalities and therefore it has a lingering use? And that's in a sense really Tosfos' distinction over here.
We're going to create haliness. And once it's got haliness, then functionality helps it not be Muktza.
Correct, but we're going to have to swallow that Chiddush over the course of the next few weeks or months. Yes, yeah. There is a concept in Halacha called kaliness, functionality, in which there's a commonality between all functionalities. In a sense, there are overlaps. Yeah, and in essence, again, I said that in hindsight, we probably started Muktza from the wrong sugya because we should have done this sugya first, and this is why these sugyas are important. Tosfos really draws our attention to that. He says that something that breaks, and it's not this crystal vase that shatters into useless pieces, but it breaks into a ceramic plate that breaks into, you've got a usable piece of clay. I mean, now they don't know what to do with these things, but you get a usable piece of clay that you could use for something, of earthenware that you could use for something, wouldn't necessarily become Muktza according to some opinions. even though it's a completely new function, it's no longer a plate, but it nonetheless has lingering kaliness about it, has lingering functionality, because all functionality is part of one. It's there to serve human beings. It's there as an extension of our ability to operate in the world. That's my best. Gary asked me last time, can I define Kali? And I said, not exactly, but Kali is around the idea of implements and tools that we use, material objects that we use to serve our needs and do things that we couldn't do by ourselves, but it's still us doing things with. Okay.
In these days, say everything that breaks is homemade for recycling.
True, but the recycling could be a complete repurposing. In other words, melting it down and making it into something completely new, and therefore that would be insufficient in Hilchos Muktza, because it would be that would indeed be a no-lot. It has descended into the world of tohu of uselessness, of chaos, of non-functionality, and is recreated completely into functionality. The point of the shard is that conceptually I'm now repurposing it, but at no point was it useless. That's the point. I'll tell you a little story. I hope I don't lose my job for telling you this story. I had the great and enormous privilege of learning under my Rabbi Zobin. Sorry? No, it's okay. It's not such a bad story. I had the great privilege of learning under Rabbi Zobin, who was a Gon in Torah and incredible Talmud Chacham. And one day I was speaking about HaKelim and the concepts of HaKelim, and I asked him about things that we use when we're not holding them in our hands. We're not using as an expression. They just sit there, and through that they have a usefulness. It was a little more technical than that one. That was the broad point, like a mirror on the wall or a picture on the wall or the like. And he had a tremendous struggle to understand my question. And in the end, he sort of looked at me with dawning horror and said, it's a Mishnah in HaKelim, Perik Yodalet, Machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Zobin. Now, very few people are experts and remember on the spot all Mishnahs in HaKelim, and he was horrified that effectively it's not even that mafurish in the Mishnah, it's a nuance in the Mishnah that sort of I was asking something which is an explicit Mishnah. Anyway, a good friend of mine applied for the Kollel a few weeks later, and Rabbi Yitzchak interviewed him for the role, and they were talking about the Kollel, and my friend said he's somewhat drawn to joining this Kollel. It's a very high standard learning institution and so on. So he said to me, it used to be, but I've now discovered I have enough reich in the Kollel who didn't know my first Mishnah in HaKelim. It's really bad. So my friend came out and told me this, and I said with great pride, nonetheless he remained in speaking terms to me, so I'm not bringing too much shame to myself, but that was the story of anyway. Yes, so that was okay to be recorded. That's not too horrific a story. Right. Right. Why is it a KD? No, I'm saying, I'm asking you. What would you tell me? Why is it a KD? You use it, yeah. It's using it for forbidden use on Shabbos, but it's so it's not going to be a KD that has no degree of Muktza associated with it. It'll be Klisha and after Issa, and unless it's used. Yeah, there are Kelim that are used up through their functionality. In Bris, in the moshel that, again, my Rabbi Yitzchak, I should say, by the way, I mean, all the Torah that I share with you in truth is his Torah. The whole Mal way of thinking was molded by him. Everything I'm saying really is, there's one big Shem Omro in that everything I ever say really comes from him. So there are Kelim that are used up through their functionality and other Kelim that aren't. The example that Rabbi Yitzchak always used to use was what's called in Yiddish a mecca, a rubber, an eraser. So an eraser is used up through its functionality. A match is another example of a KD that's used up through its functionality. And now KD aren't used up in the functionality. In Brisk, they're of the belief, for various technical reasons that are way beyond the scope of this share, that all KD are the same as that, because all KD get used up in their functionality. They just get used up more slowly. So chairs get used up and tables get used up just more slowly. So they don't believe in this distinction that there are KD that are used up in their function. They believe all KD are matches and rubbers, because they're all used up, but that's another technical point. But yeah, so it's a KD. It's just a KD that's used up through the functionality. Yeah. Okay. So why did I mention this story of the Mishnah? I just mentioned it to bring out what we mean by a KD. A KD is something that I'm using, and now we have to discuss what's called using something. Is something that just sits there passively, and I use it through gazing at the mirror or gazing at the picture. Is that also a KD in usefulness or not? And so that none of you will embarrass me as I embarrass my rabbi answers. It's a Mishnah in HaKelim, but the concept is a KD is something that's used as an extension of my ability to function. So we'll stop there because due to storytelling and other matters we run out of time. Anyway, it's Hashem on Tuesday. We'll carry on.
Right.